All right, folks, gather round. I've got a story that'll make your skin crawl and your heart race. It happened to me just last summer, and I still get shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. So, grab your blankets and turn off the lights, because this is one heck of a nighttime horror encounter. It was a typical summer night, warm and muggy, with the air thick enough to cut with a knife. I had been out camping with a couple of buddies deep in the heart of the woods. We were telling ghost stories around the campfire, laughing and joking like any group of guys would. Little did we know, we were about to become characters in our very own horror story. As the night wore on, the fire began to die down, and one by one my friends retreated to their tents, leaving me alone with the dying embers. I decided to stay up a little longer, enjoying the solitude and the sounds of the forest at night. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling in the bushes nearby. At first I brushed it off as just a small animal scurrying through the underbrush, but then the rustling grew louder, more persistent, as if something large was moving towards me. I strained my eyes in the darkness, trying to make out any shapes in the shadows, and that's when I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the darkness. My heart leaped into my throat as I realized I wasn't alone out here. I called out to my friends, but there was no response. They were fast asleep, oblivious to the danger lurking just beyond our campsite. With trembling hands, I reached for the flashlight beside me, praying that whatever was out there wouldn't notice me. But of course, luck wasn't on my side that night. As I clicked on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, I caught a glimpse of the creature lurking in the shadows. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before, a twisted, grotesque figure with long, spindly limbs and razor-sharp claws. My blood turned to ice as I realized what I was facing, a creature straight out of my worst nightmares. It moved towards me with a slow, deliberate gait, its eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest as I backed away from the creature. But no matter how fast I ran, it seemed to be always just a few steps behind me, its breathing hot on my neck. I could hear its low, guttural growl echoing through the trees, sending shivers down my spine. I knew I was running out of options, that I couldn't keep this up much longer. But just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw a faint glimmer of light up ahead, a cabin nestled deep in the woods. With a burst of adrenaline, I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning with exertion as I sprinted towards the safety of the cabin. I could hear the creature's footsteps growing louder and louder behind me, its hot breath on my neck as it closed in. But just as I reached the cabin door, I felt a sharp pain in my leg, sending me sprawling to the ground. I turned to see the creature looming over me, its eyes blazing with hunger as it prepared to strike. With one last desperate effort, I kicked out with all my strength, catching the creature off guard and sending it stumbling backwards. Without hesitation, I scrambled to my feet and flung open the cabin door, diving inside and slamming it shut behind me. I collapsed against the door, gasping for breath as I listened to the creature's enraged cries echoing through the night. But as the minutes ticked by, the cries grew fainter and fainter until finally, there was nothing but silence. I spent the rest of the night huddled inside that cabin, too terrified to venture back out into the darkness. And when morning finally dawned, I emerged to find no trace of the creature that had hunted me through the night. To this day, I still don't know what I encountered out there in the woods that night. Some say it was a trick of the mind, a figment of my imagination brought on by the darkness and the isolation of the forest. But deep down, I know the truth. There are things out there in the world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows and haunt our nightmares. And if you ever find yourself alone in the woods at night, just remember one thing. Sometimes the things that go bump in the night are all too real.
All right, listen up, folks. I've got a story that'll make your hair stand on end, a tale of terror that'll keep you up at night. It happened to me not too long ago, and I still can't shake the feeling of dread that clings to me like a shadow. It was a night like any other, or so I thought. I was driving down a deserted stretch of highway, the darkness pressing in around me like a suffocating blanket. The only sound was the steady hum of my car's engine, punctuated by the occasional crackle of static from the radio. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, a flicker of movement in the darkness, just beyond the reach of my headlights. I brushed it off as a trick of the light, but as I drove on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I pushed the thought from my mind and focused on the road ahead. But no matter how fast I drove, the feeling of unease lingered. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw it. A figure standing by the side of the road, bathed in the sickly glow of my headlights. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest, as I stared at the figure in disbelief. It was tall and gaunt, its features obscured by the shadows, but there was something undeniably human about it, a presence that sent a shiver down my spine. I rolled down the window, my hands shaking with fear, and called out to the figure, asking if it needed help. But instead of answering, it just stood there, watching me with eyes that seemed to pierce straight through to my soul. I was about to drive away, to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible when it spoke, a voice like gravel scraping against metal, cold and hollow. "Help me," it whispered, the words sending a chill down my spine. "Please, help me." I should have listened to my instincts, should have sped away and never looked back. But something compelled me to stay, to find out what this thing wanted from me. I stepped out of the car, my legs trembling with every step as I approached the figure. And that's when I saw it, the face of a woman twisted in agony, her eyes hollow and empty. She reached out to me with hands that seemed to fade into smoke, her voice pleading for release from whatever hellish torment held her captive. And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, I felt a surge of pity for her, a desire to help her find peace. But then, as if sensing my hesitation, the woman's expression twisted into a grotesque mask of rage, her voice rising to a deafening shriek that echoed through the night. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest, as the shadows around us began to writhe and twist, taking on shapes and forms too horrific to describe. I turned and ran, my mind consumed by fear, as the echoes of the woman's screams followed me into the darkness. And though I made it out of there alive, I know that I will never truly escape the horrors that lurk in the night, the shadows that haunt us, waiting to drag us down into the depths of their darkness.
All right, grab yourselves a seat and get comfortable because I've got a tale that'll keep you on the edge of your seat all night long. Picture this. It's the dead of night, and we find ourselves on the outskirts of town, standing before the looming silhouette of an old abandoned asylum. Now let me tell you, that place was a breeding ground for nightmares. It all started with a dare, as these things often do. A group of us, looking to prove our bravery and show off to each other, decided to spend the night in the asylum. It was the kind of dare that seemed harmless enough at the time, fueled by the bravado of youth and the thrill of the unknown. As we approached the asylum, a chill ran down my spine. The building loomed before us like a dark specter, its windows broken and its walls covered in ivy. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see in a horror movie, not in real life. But we were determined to go through with it, to prove once and for all who among us was the bravest. So, with our hearts pounding in our chests, we pushed open the creaky old doors and stepped inside. The air inside the asylum was thick with dust and decay, and the only sound was the echoing of our footsteps on the cracked linoleum floors. We split up, each taking a different wing of the building, eager to explore every dark corner and hidden alcove. For a while, it was almost fun, like a game of hide and seek in the world's creepiest haunted house. We laughed and joked as we searched for ghosts in the shadows, our flashlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of light in a sea of black. But as the night wore on and the darkness deepened, the atmosphere began to change. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to grow darker, swallowing up everything in their path. That's when we heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing through the halls, coming closer and closer with each passing moment. We froze in place, our hearts pounding in our chests, as we listened to the sound drawing nearer. I called out to my friends, but there was no response. Just the eerie silence of the abandoned asylum, broken only by the sound of our own ragged breathing. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the footsteps stopped. We stood there in the darkness, listening intently for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. No sound, no movement, nothing but the oppressive silence of the asylum. We should have taken that as our cue to leave, to get out while we still had the chance. But something compelled us to stay, to push deeper into the asylum and uncover its secrets. I found myself drawn to a staircase at the end of the hallway, its steps creaking ominously as I ascended into the darkness above. The air grew colder with each step I took, and the sense of unease that had been gnawing at the edges of my consciousness grew stronger. As I reached the top of the staircase, I found myself in a long, dimly lit corridor, its walls lined with doors that seemed to stretch on forever. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of which way to go, when I heard it, a soft, muffled whisper echoing through the darkness. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but then I heard it again, closer this time, and unmistakably human. I called out to my friends thinking one of them was trying to scare me, but there was no response. Just the eerie silence of the abandoned asylum, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I pressed on, my heart pounding in my chest, until I came to a door at the end of the corridor. It was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered from within, casting strange shadows on the walls. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door open and stepped inside, my flashlight illuminating the scene before me. What I saw made my blood run cold. A figure hunched over in the corner, its back to me, whispering incoherently to itself. I called out to it, my voice barely more than a whisper, but the figure didn't respond. It just kept muttering to itself, rocking back and forth in the darkness, oblivious to my presence. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest, when suddenly the figure stopped moving and turned towards me. Its eyes were empty sockets, black holes that seemed to devour the light around them, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling with fear, as the figure began to shamble towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors as I fled from whatever horror lurked within that asylum. I made it out of there alive, but the memory of that night still haunts me to this day. They say that the asylum is haunted by the spirits of those who died within its walls, and after what I saw that night, I believe it. There are some things in this world that are best left undisturbed, some horrors that are better left unexplored, and the abandoned asylum is definitely one of them. So, if you ever find yourself tempted to explore its dark halls, just remember one thing. Beware the whispers in the night, for they may lead you to a fate worse than death.
Subscribe to Terrifying, where chills are verifying.